So back for part two of our World War II discussion or World War II presentation during the war. Battle of the Bulge. What you need to know is this basically D-Day is a game changer, and it opens up two fronts. So now Hitler has to fight troops on both sides. He's got troops down in Italy, he's got troops over in the Soviet Union, and he's going to have troops over on the Western Front fighting the Americans and British. So it's very successful. The last German offensive is called the Battle of the Bulge because there was a bulge in our line where our troops were not as heavily defended, and the Germans picked that point to invade. Long story short, they lose about 600,000 men in this battle, and they are no longer able to fight an offensive war. They can only retreat. So what is VE Day? VE Day is Victory in Europe Day. Hitler will commit suicide soon before, like in late April, the 29th, 30th, somewhere along in there. And he basically marries his longtime girlfriend, Eva Braun, the night before. The next day, she takes a cyanide pill, and he basically takes a cyanide pill and shoots himself in the head. And his guards burn his body, and it does not fully burned all the way, but it's burned unrecognizable. Germans unconditionally surrender May 8, 1945. So the war in Europe will be over. You do need to know these conferences here that are held during and after the war. Really, these are the three that are held during the war. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met to plan the war. As you see, the Casablanca Conference was to attack the Italian peninsula. And remember, in this conference, this is where Roosevelt warns us of having too many Jews in North Africa in a professional capacity. The Tehran Conference. Germany would be broken up after the war. The Soviet Union would attack Japan when they're finished with the European war to help us out. And we agreed to create the United Nations. At the Yalta Conference, this is the last conference the big three really meet at. By this time, FDR is in bad health. And by the next conference, it will have a new president, and Churchill will be out of office. So, the Yalta Conference, we agreed to divide Germany up, and we agreed to divide Berlin up into 4 parts. This actually is the beginning of the conflict between the U.S. and the Soviet Union in the Cold War. April 12, 1945, FDR dies about 82 days into his 4th term as president. Remember, the 22nd Amendment hasn't been passed yet, so he served 4 terms as president, only president to do so. Harry Truman will take over as president. The Potsdam Conference. Now, unlike FDR, unlike Roosevelt, Roosevelt did not fear communism. He did not fear the Russians. He did not. Truman does. And at the Potsdam Conference, Truman replaces Roosevelt. Churchill loses, so he's replaced by Attlee. And Stalin's the only one left that's been there throughout the war. This occurs after the war in Europe, happens in July, I believe July 16th of 1945. Truman learns of the bomb on his way over to this conference. He tells Churchill, but he will not tell Stalin, and Stalin knows that, and Stalin finds out about the bomb anyway. They had spies in the Manhattan Project. The Soviets did. So here's Japan. Here's Japan's empire. If you look at it, it's actually larger than the German Empire. We all know about these pictures. This is December 7th. This plume of smoke here from the Arizona that's said to be about 41 stories high. And that's a picture over on the right of the Arizona after the battle. So quickly, war for us started with Pearl Harbor. The turning point, the Japanese want to go off and finish Pearl Harbor. We break their code and we surprise them, the island of Midway, with we were badly outnumbered. Of course, we only had four or five aircraft carriers and really not many battleships at this time. But we surprise attack them and we beat them, and they lose 4 irreplaceable aircraft carriers. The Japanese do. So turning point in the Pacific War, June of 1942. So, quickly, we need to know about what island hopping is. This is a strategy developed by General Douglas MacArthur, who had come out of retirement to be a part of this. And he comes up with this plan, and he says, let's bypass the Japanese strongholds and let's set up bases on the weaker Japanese islands all the way to Japan so we can invade Japan. Later in the war, we're going to confront kamikazes. Kamikazes, Japanese for divine wind. And these were all volunteer pilots, and they flew their planes into the sides of our ships. It was like a living torpedo or a living missile. Very effective for a while. At Iwo Jima, we lose quite a few men. I believe you're going to see it on a slide later, but we lose about 13,000, I believe that is, in total, or maybe it's 6,000 in total. But Iwo Jima is where Mount Suribachi, where we raise our flag. The Marines have that famous pose. That's actually the second pose. At the background here that you see on the PowerPoint, that's actually the second pose. The first pose was not so glorious. I mean, so they went back up the mountain and took this one. And at the bottom here is the USS North Carolina on the Gilbert Islands. I believe it's 1943. The one that's docked right downtown. The Philippines. General MacArthur proclaims he shall return when he evacuated in March of 42, so he did. Then we go, we'll be in Okinawa, and it's Okinawa we lose 13,000 people. The Japanese lose 110,000. 2 generals commit suicide. 1,900 kamikaze attacks, sinking 30 U.S. ships. As we move closer to Japan, the Japanese fight more and more furious. And they do not have the word surrender in their vocabulary. So they literally fight to the death. Here's the USS North Carolina firing. As you see, there's a dead Japanese soldier, and here are the beaches of Iwo Jima. I know it's a blurry picture, but that is a picture of the beaches. The Japanese would actually, when they were dead, they would hold on to grenades, so when Americans would turn them over, it'd blow Americans up. We had a bad crisis of battle fatigue and PTSD, what we call PTSD, during World War II because of what the Japanese, they just never give up fighting. 10-year-old kids would run at them with grenades and guns, and it was just not a good scene. They would mutilate our bodies as well, our dead soldiers. So, the Manhattan Project. This was our most top secret program, and it was to obtain nuclear power. Headed by Robert Oppenheimer, the gentleman up there on your top right, led to the production of the first 3 nuclear weapons, the Test Bomb, Fat Man, and Little Boy. These were their code names. So, to bomb or not? Here's reasons not to bomb. If we use the weapons now, our position in the future negotiations could be prejudiced. This would lead to a nuclear arms race. The U.S. could be at a disadvantage. Our population and production areas are not as spread out. As you see, reasons to drop the bomb. It shortened the war, save American and Japanese lives. Public response, we could have ended the war and we didn't. So President Truman has to look at that as well. Why did my kid die when he didn't have to? Stop the Soviets in Asia. In other words, we don't have to worry about them helping us out and worry about them taking land because they hadn't given Eastern Europe back by this time. The Japanese were close to producing their own nuclear weapon, about 6 months away, and so that's a reason as well. So we decide to drop the bomb. As you see here, Hiroshima happens August 6th. The Japanese don't surrender, so we drop a second bomb on Nagasaki, which both of these are military targets. A lot of civilians are going to die, but they were highly productive military towns for the Japanese military. The Japanese still won't surrender after Nagasaki. Okay, September 2nd, the Japanese finally surrenders on, I think it's on the 11th or 12th, they promised to surrender, I believe, something like that. So, VJ Day is victory over Japan. General MacArthur accepts the surrender, and there he is. It's on the USS Missouri. Why the Missouri? It's where your president's from. Harry Truman was from Independence, Missouri. So here's a little bit about the people if you want to read into this. George Patton ends up dying in a car wreck in 1949. Chester Nimitz will be your last 5-star admiral, and he's a leader of the Pacific. He's the leader of the Pacific Theater. There's Douglas MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur will stay on and rebuild Japan into a democracy and a free enterprise economy over in Japan for about 6 years. So that's the course of World War II in a nutshell.